Lee stood at the entrance of the Galactic Academy of Medical Sciences, his heart beating fast. He was the first human to ever walk through these doors. The building was huge, with tall ceilings that reached up for what seemed like miles. Strange symbols covered the walls, glowing with soft blue light. "Name and planet of origin," said a machine at the door. "Lee Jinho, Earth," he said clearly. The machine made a noise. "Human. Species classification. Carbon-based. Bilateral symmetry. Class 3 durability. Proceed to orientation hall." Lee picked up his bags and walked forward. Earth had only joined the Galactic Confederation 3 months ago. Humans were still new to everyone. The Academy had agreed to take one human student as a test. Lee had been the best medical student on Earth, so they picked him. In the orientation hall, Lee saw beings from all over the galaxy. Some had 4 arms. Some looked like clouds of gas in special suits. Others had scales or fur. Lee was the only one with skin like his. A tall being with blue skin and 4 arms approached him. "You are the human?" it asked in perfect standard galactic. "Yes, I'm Lee. I am Sung. Krevak species. I study xenobiology level 4. The beam's 4 eyes blinked at different times. "You are smaller than I expected." Lee smiled. "Humans come in different sizes." Another student floated toward them. This one looked like a ball of purple light inside a clear container. Small tentacles of energy moved inside. "This is the human." The voice came from a speaker on the container. "How strange. I am Ju, Talon species." More students gathered around Lee. They looked at him like he was an interesting animal in a zoo. Some took readings with small devices. Others whispered to each other. "Is it true that humans are filled with liquid?" asked a small green being with large eyes. "Well, we're about 60% water," Lee said. The group moved back a step, looking worried. "And you don't break? The liquid doesn't leak out?" asked Ju. Lee laughed. "Not unless we're injured badly." Some made a clicking sound. "Speaking of injuries, I've read about humans. They are remarkably fragile. No backup organs, poor sensory abilities, and very limited lifespans. I'm surprised they allowed one into the academy." The other students nodded. Lee felt his face get warm, but he stayed calm. "We may not have your physical advantages, but humans have our own strengths," he said. A wave of water moved across the floor, forming into a shape like a person. The water held itself together somehow, with small lights floating inside it. "Welcome, students. I am Professor Kim, your lead instructor in comparative physiology." The water beam's voice sounded like gentle waves. "Even our newest and most unusual student." All eyes turned to Lee again. "The human will join Block C for primary studies," Professor Kim continued. "I expect all of you to share knowledge respectfully. The Confederation believes in learning from all species, even the newest members." After orientation, Lee followed a floating light to his living area. The room adjusted itself as he entered, changing the atmosphere, temperature, and gravity to Earth normal levels. Lee put down his bags and looked out the window at the 3 moons in the sky. His computer terminal lit up with his class schedule: Advanced Xenobiology, Interspecies Medicine, Galactic Medical Ethics, and more. Lee sat on his bed, suddenly feeling very far from home. A message appeared on his screen. "Student Notai C. Human classmate assigned to Block C. Please review human medical data and safety protocols. Reminder: humans are fluid-filled with minimal protective layers. Extreme care required around the specimen." Lee sighed. He wasn't a specimen. He was a top medical student. But here, he was just the human. "I'll show them what humans can do," Lee said to himself, looking at the stars outside his window. "They think we're fragile now, but they haven't seen anything yet." Lee sat in his first practical training session, watching with interest as Professor Kim demonstrated proper care for a Talon patient. The professor's watery form rippled as he spoke. Notice how the energy patterns become uneven when a Talon experiences distress, Professor Kim said, pointing to the hologram. Even minor disruptions can be fatal without immediate stabilization. Lee took notes on his datapad. Around him, students of various species did the same. Sung sat nearby, all four of his arms busy with different tasks. Today we will practice minor injury protocols. Professor Kim continued. Each species requires specific emergency responses. The class moved to individual stations. Lee found himself paired with Ju, the purple energy being. I will demonstrate Talon emergency care, Ju said. You can show human procedures after. Lee nodded and watched as Ju created a small simulation of a Talon with a tiny tear in its containment field. Immediately, alarms went off. 3 medical robots rushed to the simulation, creating a complete energy shield around it. Without instant field stabilization, a Talon would lose cohesion within 40 seconds, Ju explained. The patient must then undergo full energy rebalancing, which takes 14 days in medical stasis. All that for a small tear? Lee asked, surprised. Ju's energy pulsed brightly. Of course. Is that not serious for humans as well? Lee shook his head. For something that small, we'd clean it and maybe put on a bandage. It would heal on its own. The purple energy inside Ju's container swirled rapidly. Heal on its own, without medical intervention. Yes, human bodies can repair most minor damage without help. Ju made a sound like static, fascinating and disturbing. Your turn to demonstrate. Lee activated the human medical simulation. A hologram of a human appeared, with a small cut on its arm. For this injury, first clean the wound with antiseptic, Lee said, showing the process. Then apply pressure until bleeding stops. Several students from nearby stations had gathered to watch. They murmured to each other in various languages. Where are the emergency stasis fields? Asked a tall, insect-like student. We don't need them for minor injuries, Lee explained. But the internal fluid is escaping. Some pointed at the small amount of blood in the simulation. That's normal. Humans have plenty of blood. We can lose some without harm. Professor Kim floated over to observe. Perhaps explain human healing to your classmates, Lee. Lee nodded. Human bodies have natural defenses. Blood clots to stop bleeding. White blood cells fight infection. New skin grows to close wounds. The alien students looked at each other in disbelief. Your body does this without medical technology? Asked a small green student. Yes, it's part of our biology. During lunch break, Lee sat alone in the cafeteria. His food looked like blue gel cubes. He poked at them with his fork. Sung approached Lee's table. May I join you? Of course, Lee said, surprised. Sung sat down, his 4 arms holding different items. I have been researching humans since class. Your species evolved on a high-gravity planet with many predators, correct? Lee nodded. Earth has a lot of dangers. This explains much. Most advanced species evolved in protected environments. The Kravak developed on a moon with no predators. The Talon formed in gas clouds with little competition. So they never needed to heal quickly. Lee asked. Exactly. Most species developed intelligence as their only defense. Physical damage meant death until we created medical technology. Sung's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. Humans developed both intelligence and physical resilience. Unusual combination. Professor Kim flowed over to their table. Discussing comparative evolution, students. Yes, Professor, said Sung. Human healing abilities are remarkable. Indeed. Professor Kim's watery form shimmered. Tomorrow's practical session will be very educational. We will observe emergency response techniques for all major species. The professor paused, looking at Lee. Including humans, I am curious to see these natural defenses in action. Lee swallowed hard. Something in the professor's tone made him uneasy. Just a standard demonstration, right? He asked. Professor Kim's water form rippled in what might have been a smile. Of course, Just standard procedures, nothing to worry about. As the professor flowed away, Sung leaned closer to Lee. I would prepare myself if I were you. The professor has a reputation for thorough demonstrations. Lee looked down at his blue food cubes. Suddenly, he wasn't hungry anymore. The next day, Lee entered the advanced xenobiology laboratory. The room was large, filled with strange machines and containers. Students worked at different stations, studying samples and running tests. Professor Kim's watery form moved around the room, checking on everyone's work. Today we examined cellular responses to environmental stress, the professor announced. Each team will test different species tissue samples. Lee joined Sung and Ju at their station. They had been assigned to study the effects of various chemicals on different species cells. I have prepared samples from 15 species, Sung said, his forearms moving quickly as he organized small containers, including a human sample from the medical database. Lee looked at the tiny bit of human tissue in one container. It felt strange to see human cells next to alien ones. The test requires precise mixing of chemicals, Ju explained, his purple energy swirling inside his containment field. We must be very careful. The three students worked together for an hour. Lee was measuring a green liquid when he heard Sung make a strange clicking sound. There is a problem with the pressure valve, Sung said, pointing to a large container near their station. The readings are too high. Lee looked at the container. A red light was flashing on its side. Should we tell Professor Kim? I will check it first, Sung said, moving toward the container. He pressed buttons on the control panel with two of his hands while his other hands held testing equipment. Suddenly, there was a loud hissing sound. Sung stepped back quickly. Everyone move away. The seal is failing. Before anyone could react, the container exploded. A loud bang echoed through the lab. Sharp pieces of metal and plastic flew everywhere. Students screamed in different languages. Some hid under tables. Others ran for the exit. Emergency lights began flashing. Lee felt something hit his arm hard. He looked down and saw a large metal shard sticking out of his forearm. Blood began flowing from the wound, dripping onto the floor. Lee is damaged. Ju's voice came through his speaker, sounding panicked. Human breach. Fluid loss. The lab went into full emergency mode. Sirens wailed. Barriers came down around different sections of the room. Professor Kim rushed over, his water form moving faster than Lee had ever seen. Medical emergency. Human injury. Activate stasis field. Sung stood frozen, all four eyes wide with shock. I have caused harm to the human. This is terrible. All around Lee, alien students were panicking. Some were turning away, unable to look at his injury. Others were frantically calling for help on their communication devices. Professor, one student called out, should we begin human death rituals? My database says humans cannot survive significant fluid loss. Contact Earth authorities immediately, another student shouted. We need human medical protocols. Ju's energy was pulsing erratically. The human's internal liquid is escaping. We must contain it. Lee looked at the chaos around him. The cut was painful, but he knew it wasn't life-threatening. The metal piece had gone into his arm, but it hadn't hit any major arteries. Professor Kim was preparing a floating stasis chamber. Quickly, we must place the human in suspended animation to prevent further damage. Two medical robots approached Lee with restraints, ready to move him into the chamber. Wait, Lee said, looking at his arm. This isn't necessary. No one seemed to hear him over the alarms and panic. Lee, do not move, Sung said, his voice shaking. Help is coming. I am deeply sorry for this accident. The human is becoming delirious from fluid loss, one student whispered loudly to another. They often hallucinate before shutdown. Lee tried again, raising his voice. Everyone, please calm down. This isn't as bad as it looks. Professor Kim moved closer, the professor's watery form rippling with concern. Save your strength, human student. We will do everything possible to preserve your life functions. Lee sighed as the medical robots reached for him. This was going to be interesting. Lee raised his hand to stop the medical robots. "Everyone, please stop," he said loudly. The room went quiet except for the alarms. "Turn off those alarms," Lee said calmly. "I'm not dying." Professor Kim waved a watery tentacle, and the alarm stopped. The professor moved closer to Lee, studying him with glowing spots that served as eyes. "You are losing vital fluids," Professor Kim said. "Your species cannot function without sufficient internal liquid." Lee looked at his arm. The metal piece was about 2 inches long, stuck in his forearm. Blood was flowing, but not spurting, which meant no artery was hit. "This is just a scratch," Lee said. He carefully pulled out the metal shard, making several alien students gasp in horror. "The human is removing its protective covering." A student shrieked. "It's making the damage worse." Sung rushed forward with all 4 arms outstretched. "Lee, please stop. You must not cause further injury." Lee shook his head. "I need to remove the foreign object first. That's basic first aid." He pressed his other hand over the wound to slow the bleeding. "Just give me a bandage and some antiseptic," he said, looking at the medical supplies nearby. "I'll be fine." The aliens stared at him in shock. No one moved. "He's in shock." Ju's voice came through his speaker. "The human's brain is not working properly due to fluid loss." Professor Kim's water form rippled in concern. "I will administer a sedative to ease your passing." "I'm not passing anything," Lee said firmly. "I'm not going to die from this. Humans are tougher than you think." Lee walked to the first aid station on the wall, still holding pressure on his wound. The aliens watched in stunned silence as he took an antiseptic spray and a bandage with his free hand. "Can someone help me clean and wrap this?" Lee asked. "It's hard to do with one hand." Sung stepped forward cautiously. You are still functioning normally." "Yes," Lee said patiently. "This is painful, but not dangerous. I've lost maybe half a cup of blood. Humans have about 5 liters of blood. We can lose some without harm." Professor Kim floated closer, fascination replacing concern in the professor's watery form. "Explain this healing process you mentioned yesterday." Lee nodded and began explaining while Sung carefully helped clean the wound. "First, blood cells called platelets start to form clots to stop the bleeding. See, it's already slowing down." The aliens gathered around to watch. Then white blood cells move to the area to fight any infection. Lee continued. "My body will create a scab over the cut while new skin and tissue grow underneath. In about a week, it will heal completely." "Without medical technology?" asked a student in the back. "Without technology," Lee confirmed. "It's natural." Sung finished bandaging Lee's arm. "This is remarkable," he said. "If a Krevac suffered such damage, we would require 3 weeks in a healing chamber." Professor Kim's water form vibrated with excitement. "In all my years teaching xenobiology, I have never witnessed such biological resilience." Ju moved closer, his purple energy swirling rapidly. "Do all humans heal this way?" "Yes," Lee said. "We evolved on a planet with many dangers. Those who could survive injuries had a better chance to live." "Fascinating," Professor Kim said. "Would you allow us to document your healing process? This could be valuable research." Lee nodded. "Of course." "Class dismissed for today," Professor Kim announced. "Except for Lee. I would like to conduct some non-invasive scans with your permission." As the other students left, still looking back at Lee with amazement, Sung stayed behind. "I am sorry for causing your injury," he said, his 4 eyes blinking sadly. "It was an accident," Lee said with a smile. "And now everyone has learned something new about humans." "Indeed," Professor Kim said, preparing a scanner. "I believe this is the beginning of a very educational experience for us all." By the next morning, news of Lee's injury and survival had spread throughout the academy. As he walked to his first class, students stopped to stare at him. Some even took pictures with small devices. "It's the healing human," he heard one whisper. I heard it lost enough fluid to kill 3 Talons, another said. Lee sighed. He didn't like being called it, but he understood that many species still saw humans as strange new creatures. When he entered the classroom, Professor Kim was already there. The professor's watery form brightened upon seeing Lee. Our resilient human has arrived, Professor Kim announced. How is your injury healing? Lee rolled up his sleeve to show the bandage. It's fine. A bit sore, but that's normal. Professor Kim gestured to a display screen at the front of the room. With Lee's permission, I have been monitoring his healing process. Today, we will observe something remarkable. The screen showed microscopic images of Lee's wound from the day before. Then it switched to new images taken that morning. Notice the formation of fibrin strands creating a mesh over the wound site, Professor Kim explained. White blood cells are already attacking potential infection sources. Skin cells at the edges are multiplying, preparing to close the gap. The alien students watched with fascination. One raised a tentacle. Professor, is the speed of repair normal for humans? According to Earth medical data, yes, Professor Kim replied. In fact, this is considered a slow-healing wound by human standards. Murmurs filled the room. Lee felt uncomfortable as everyone looked at him with new interest. After class, Sung approached Lee. All 4 of his arms were carrying different data pads. I have been researching Earth's evolutionary history, Sung said excitedly. Humans developed on a planet with over 8 million species, many of them dangerous predators. Your healing abilities were essential for survival. Lee nodded. Earth can be a tough place. Ju floated over to join them. I have a question, if I may. Do humans heal from all injuries this way? Not all injuries, Lee explained. Some are too severe. We can't regrow limbs or repair major organ damage without medical help. But cuts, burns, and broken bones. Yes, those heal naturally. Broken bones. Ju's energy swirled rapidly. Your skeletal structure can repair itself too. Before Lee could answer, a group of senior researchers entered the classroom. They wore formal academy uniforms and carried advanced scanning equipment. Professor Kim's water form rippled with excitement. Lee, these are members of the Academy's Advanced Research Division. They have requested permission to study your healing process. An older Kravak with gray skin stepped forward. I am Senior Researcher Han. Your species' regenerative abilities are of great interest to galactic medicine. Would you consent to a research study? Lee shifted uncomfortably. What kind of study? Non-invasive scans, tissue samples, and documentation of your current healing, Han explained. The simple cut on your arm could provide valuable data for treating injuries across many species. Lee thought for a moment. If it helps others, I'm willing. For the next 3 days, Lee became the most studied injured person in the Academy's history. Researchers scanned his arm every few hours. They took samples of the fluids around his wound. They measured his temperature, heart rate, and other vital signs. News spread beyond the Academy. Lee received messages from medical centers across the galaxy asking questions about human physiology. Sung and Ju stayed with Lee through it all, helping explain things and keeping the more enthusiastic researchers at bay when Lee needed rest. You have changed how many see humans, Sung told him one evening. Before, they thought humans were primitive and fragile. Now they see your strength. Lee looked at his bandaged arm. The wound underneath was already forming a scab, the skin around it pink with new growth. I never thought a simple cut would cause so much excitement, he said. Professor Kim, who had been monitoring nearby, moved closer. It is not just the cut, Lee. It is what it represents. Your species has much to teach us about resilience. 2 weeks passed. Lee's wound had healed well, leaving only a small pink line where the cut had been. The constant tests and scans had finally stopped, allowing him to focus on his studies again. One morning, Lee received a message on his datapad. It was from Professor Kim, asking him to come to the main lecture hall immediately. When Lee arrived, He found Sung and Ju waiting outside. "There you are," Sung said, all four eyes blinking rapidly in excitement. "Did you hear the news?" "What news?" Lee asked. Ju's purple energy pulsed brightly. "The Galactic Medical Convention begins tomorrow. It happens once every 5 years. Medical experts from all over the galaxy attend. And..." Lee wasn't sure why they were so excited. "And Sung said, Professor Kim has selected us to present our research on human healing mechanisms." Lee's eyes widened. "Really? Bus?" "Yes." Ju bobbed up and down in his containment field. "Our analysis of your injury healing has been approved as an official presentation. It's a great honor for students to present at the convention." Professor Kim flowed through the doorway. "You're all here. Excellent. Come inside, we need to prepare." Inside the lecture hall, Professor Kim showed them the presentation schedule. Their talk was titled Autonomous Regeneration in Carbon-Based Lifeforms, the Human Anomaly. "You want me to talk about my cut?" Lee asked, feeling strange about it. "Not just the cut," Professor Kim explained, water rippling thoughtfully. "The significance of natural healing in a galactic community where most species require complete medical intervention for even minor injuries." For the next day, the four of them worked on their presentation. Sung prepared detailed slides showing the healing process at a cellular level. Ju created an interactive model comparing human healing to other species. Lee provided information about Earth's medical history. When the day of the convention arrived, Lee felt nervous. The grand hall of the academy was filled with thousands of medical professionals from across the galaxy. Some forms he recognized, others were completely alien to him. "There are 17 different environment sections," Sung explained as they walked in. "Some species breathe methane, others need high pressure or extreme temperatures." Their presentation was scheduled for the afternoon. As they waited, Lee listened to other talks about new medical technologies, strange diseases, and treatments. Finally, it was their turn. Professor Kim flowed onto the stage first. "Esteemed colleagues," the professor began, "today we present research that may change how we approach healing throughout the galaxy." Lee, Sung, and Ju joined the professor on stage. As they began their presentation, Lee noticed the crowd growing larger. More beings moved toward their section, curious about the human. Sung showed microscopic images of Lee's wound healing day by day. Ju demonstrated how this compared to injuries in 20 other species. The audience watched in silence. Then Lee stepped forward. "On Earth, what happened to me is so common we barely notice it," he explained. "Children fall and cut themselves. Their parents clean the wound, put on a bandage, and within days it heals. No technology needed." The hall erupted with questions. Medical directors from different worlds wanted to know more. Is this ability present in all humans? Can human healing be transferred to other species? What are the limits of this autonomous regeneration? Lee and his friends answered as best they could, with Professor Kim helping with the more complex questions. After the presentation ended, a tall, serious-looking Kravak approached them. His skin was darker than Sung's, and he wore the symbols of a medical director. "I am Director Park of the Kravak Medical Institute," he said formally. "Your presentation was most illuminating." "Thank you, Director," Professor Kim said respectfully. Director Park looked directly at Lee. "I have a proposition for you, human. Our institute would like to study human healing more extensively." He paused, then continued. "We would like to observe how humans recover from more significant injuries, under controlled conditions, of course." Lee stared at the director, not sure he had heard correctly. "You want to hurt humans, on purpose?" he asked slowly. Director Park blinked his 4 eyes in sequence. "For science, yes. The potential benefits for countless species could be enormous." Lee looked at his friends, then back at the director. He didn't know what to say. Lee stood in the communications room of the academy, waiting for his call to connect to Earth. After Director Park's proposal, he needed advice. The screen lit up, showing Dr. Choi, the head of Earth's Medical Ethics Committee. She was an older woman with kind eyes and gray hair. "Lee, it's good to see you," she said. "We've received your report about the interest in human healing abilities." Lee nodded. "Director Park wants to study more serious injuries. He's talking about deliberately hurting human volunteers." Dr. Choi frowned. "That goes against our basic medical ethics. First, do no harm." "I know," Lee said, "but he argues that the benefits could be enormous. Millions of aliens die from minor injuries that humans survive easily. If they could adapt our healing abilities, it's still unethical to cause harm, even for potential good," Dr. Choi said firmly. After the call ended, Lee sat alone, thinking. The door slid open, and Sung entered. "I hope to find you here," Sung said, sitting down with all four arms folded. "You seem troubled." Lee sighed. "On Earth, we have strict rules about medical research. We don't hurt people, even if it might help others." Sung's eyes blinked in sequence. "The Kravak have similar ethics." Director Park's suggestion surprised me too. "What should I do?" Lee asked. "I don't know," Sung admitted, "but you're not alone in this decision." Back at the convention the next day, Director Park had gathered a group of senior medical officials from different species. They were waiting for Lee in a private meeting room. "Ah, the human has arrived," Director Park said. "We have been discussing the research possibilities." Lee looked around the room. There were at least 10 different species represented. "I've spoken with Earth's Medical Ethics Committee," Lee said. "They don't approve of causing harm for research." A tall, thin alien with glowing spots stepped forward. "Even if it saves countless lives, my species, the loom, cannot survive even minor skin punctures. We die within minutes without medical technology." "I understand," Lee said, "but there must be another way." Professor Kim flowed into the room. "Perhaps there is." "Lee, may I speak with you?" They moved to a corner of the room. "I have been thinking about this problem," Professor Kim said quietly. "Director Park's approach is wrong, but his goal has merit. Many species would benefit from understanding human healing." "What do you suggest?" Lee asked. "Earth has had humans for thousands of years," the professor said. "Surely in that time, your species has recorded countless injuries and healing processes." Lee's eyes widened. "Medical records. Earth has massive databases of injury treatment and recovery. Billions of cases, all documented. Could these records be shared for research?" Professor Kim asked. "I think so," Lee said. "No new harm needed." They returned to the group. Lee explained the idea of using Earth's existing medical records instead of creating new injuries. "Earth has documented injuries and healing for centuries," he said. "We have detailed records of everything from small cuts to major surgeries. All this data already exists." Director Park's four eyes narrowed. "But these are just records. We need to observe the process directly." "Not necessarily," Professor Kim said. "Earth medicine has advanced imaging technology. Many healing processes have been recorded in real time." Lee nodded. "And Earth has many animals with similar healing abilities to humans. Some are even better at it. Salamanders can regrow entire limbs." A murmur ran through the group. "This may be acceptable," Director Park said slowly. "No new harm, but still valuable research." "I can contact Earth's medical databases," Lee offered. "They might be willing to share information for galactic medicine. And I can help organize a research team," Sung added, stepping forward. "We can study Earth's records and apply the findings to other species." Director Park looked around at the other medical officials. Most were nodding in agreement. "Very well," he said finally. "We will pursue this alternative approach. Lee, please arrange access to Earth's medical records." As the meeting ended, Ju floated over to Lee. "You found a good solution," he said, purple energy swirling calmly. "Knowledge without suffering." Lee smiled, feeling the small scar on his arm. "That's what good medicine should be about, no matter what planet you're from." 1 month after the convention, the Academy's main research lab had changed completely. One entire wall now displayed Earth's medical database, showing thousands of documented healing cases. Students and researchers from all species worked together, studying the information. Lee walked through the lab, amazed at how much had happened. Earth had agreed to share its medical records for galactic research. In return, the Galactic Confederation would share advanced medical technology with Earth. Lee, over here, Sung called from a research station. All four of his arms were busy working with different screens. Lee joined his friend. How's it going? Fascinating, Sung said, eyes blinking with excitement. I've been studying how human bone fractures heal. The way your bodies create callous tissue to bridge the break is remarkable. Nearby, Ju was showing a group of students a hologram of human skin healing. Notice how the skin cells multiply and move to close the wound, Ju explained, his purple energy swirling smoothly as he taught. No other known species can do this without medical help. Professor Kim flowed over to join Lee and Sung. The research is progressing well, the professor said. Director Park has requested a progress meeting this afternoon. Later, in the meeting room, Director Park and representatives from 15 different species gathered to hear about the research. We have been studying Earth's medical records for 1 month, Professor Kim began. The information has been illuminating. Sung stepped forward with a presentation. Humans have documented healing processes for thousands of years. Their bodies can repair damage that would be fatal to most of us. He showed images of human injuries and healing, from simple cuts to complex surgeries. The aliens watched with great interest. But even more valuable, Lee added, is Earth's biodiversity. Many Earth animals have healing abilities that surpass even humans. Lee showed videos of starfish regrowing arms, lizards regrowing tails, and salamanders regrowing limbs. The alien audience made sounds of amazement. These creatures evolved on the same planet as humans, Lee explained. Earth's dangers forced all life there to develop ways to survive injury. Director Park leaned forward. Can these abilities be adapted for other species? Professor Kim's water form rippled thoughtfully. Perhaps. We're studying the cellular mechanisms now. Some healing factors might be transferable through medicine. There's more, Lee said. Instead of studying injuries, we should study Earth's diverse ecosystem. Many Earth organisms have amazing abilities we could learn from. Lee showed images of tardigrades surviving extreme conditions, jellyfish reversing their aging process, and plants healing from damage. Earth has millions of species, each with unique survival adaptations, Lee explained. We can learn from all of them without causing harm. Director Park was silent for a moment. Then he stood up. I admit my approach was limited. This alternative provides more valuable data than I expected. The director looked at Lee. Your species continues to surprise us, not just with your physical resilience, but with your ethical thinking. After the meeting, a new research plan was created. Teams would study Earth's medical records and biodiversity for healing mechanisms that could help other species. Lee, Sung, and Ju were made student leaders of the project. Professor Kim would oversee their work. In the lab that evening, Lee found Sung looking at Earth's star chart on a screen. Your planet is so unusual, Sung said. So many dangers, yet so much life. Lee nodded. Earth shaped us, made us tough. More than tough, Sung replied, all four eyes focused on Lee. It made you compassionate too. You found a way to help others without causing harm. That's just being human, Lee said with a smile. Professor Kim joined them, the professor's watery form glowing softly in the dim light. Perhaps that is the most valuable lesson from Earth, Professor Kim said, not just how to heal bodies, but how to heal while respecting all life. Lee looked at the screens showing Earth's organisms. Each one had evolved unique ways to survive, adapt, and heal. The universe has so much to learn from each other, he said. This is just the beginning. 6 months had passed since the beginning of the Earth Healing Research Project. The Academy buzzed with excitement as the first clinical trials were about to begin. Lee stood in the observation room, watching as a young Talon floated in a special chamber. The Talon had a small tear in its energy field, similar to what would be a cut on human skin. Normally, this would require immediate stasis and 2 weeks of intensive care. Today was different. Today they would try the new treatment. "Are we ready?" Professor Kim asked, flowing into the room. Director Park nodded. All 4 eyes focused on the patient. The treatment contains cellular factors derived from human platelets, adapted for Talon energy patterns. Sung stood next to Lee, recording everything with scientific instruments. Ju was communicating with the Talon patient, translating its feelings and responses. "Beginning treatment now," announced the medical team leader. A fine mist was sprayed into the Talon's containment field. For several minutes, nothing seemed to happen. Then, slowly, the edges of the tear began to stabilize. "Energy patterns are stabilizing," Sung reported, checking his instruments. "The tear is no longer expanding." An hour later, the impossible happened. The tear in the Talon's energy field began to close on its own. "It's working." Ju's voice came through his speaker, energy swirling excitedly. The patient reports no pain or distress. By the end of the day, the Talon's injury had completely closed. It was the first time in recorded history that a Talon had healed from an injury without extended medical stasis. The news spread quickly throughout the Galactic Confederation. Soon, other species began requesting the new treatments. Each needed different adaptations based on their biology, but the basic healing principles from Earth worked for many. 1 week later, the Galactic Confederation Council called a special meeting. Lee, along with Professor Kim, Sung, and Ju, was invited to attend. The council chamber was enormous, with representatives from hundreds of worlds sitting in sections designed for their specific needs. Some floated in gas chambers, others sat in pools of liquid, and some stood on solid platforms. The head counselor, a tall being made of crystalline structures, spoke first. "We are here to recognize a significant advancement in galactic medicine. For the first time, species without natural healing abilities can recover from injuries that once required extensive medical intervention." The council turned its attention to the Academy team. "Earth, our newest member world, has brought us this gift, not through advanced technology, but through the simple resilience of its life forms." Lee felt uncomfortable with so many eyes on him, but Professor Kim nudged him forward. "Lee Jinho of Earth, please address the council." Lee walked to the speaking platform, feeling very small among the galaxy's leaders. "I didn't do anything special," he began. "What happened was an accident. I got hurt, and I healed, like any human would." He touched the small scar on his arm, now barely visible. "On Earth, we take healing for granted. We get cuts, breaks, and burns, and our bodies fix them. It's just how we are." Lee looked around at the diverse beings. "But now I understand how special it is. And I'm glad that what we learn from Earth's life can help others across the galaxy." After the council meeting, a new medical research center was established. Scientists from all worlds would study Earth's organisms and their healing abilities. Back at the Academy, Lee prepared for his final exams. He would graduate soon, the first human to complete the Academy's medical program. Professor Kim found Lee studying in the library. "I have news," the professor said, water form rippling happily. "The Academy has offered you a position after graduation, Assistant Professor of Comparative Physiology." Lee looked up in surprise. "Really? Me?" "Yes. And more humans will join next term. 5 have already been accepted." As Lee walked through the Academy halls the next day, he saw the new students arriving. Aliens of all kinds moved through the building, preparing for the new term. In one corridor, a small group of human students stood looking nervous and excited. Lee approached them with a smile. "Welcome to the Galactic Academy," he said warmly. "Don't worry, you'll fit in just fine." One of the humans pointed at Lee's arm. "Is that the famous scar? The one that changed galactic medicine?" Lee looked down at the tiny line on his skin. "It's nothing special. he said with a smile. Just a scratch.